All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of the Western Mass Historical Commission Coalition. We are pleased to host another session via Zoom, which we've been doing now for several years, and very pleased with the interest that we've seen in this topic of adaptive reuse of historic schools. We have a couple of case studies to share with you this morning, and I want to let everybody know one of our planned presenters had a medical emergency to handle with her family. So we will have two of our three planned presenters joining us today. We will hear from them in a moment, but I just wanted to welcome everyone, acknowledge some members of our planning group that coordinates these sessions on a quarterly basis, Shannon Walsh. Thank you for joining us, Ted Harvey, and Stacia Kaplanson. Stacia, do you want to share anything about Preservation Mass with the group?
Thanks, Laura. Yes, I work as the preservation circuit rider for Preservation Massachusetts in Central and Western Massachusetts. We are a statewide organization, a nonprofit that advocates for the use and reuse of historic buildings and support advocates doing advocacy work. A couple of our initiatives to let you know, and for more information, visit our website, preservationmass.org. We're currently accepting letters of inquiry for the Massachusetts Historic Preservation Matching Grant Program, which is a fabulous opportunity for nonprofit organizations to get some matching funds to help with exterior work on historic buildings. Check out our website. That's until November 1st. And we also host a statewide conference on historic preservation that will be held September 27th in Worcester at the Hanover Theater. Registration for that closes next Monday, the 23rd. And just check out our website. There's a lot of great information there. Thank you, Laura, for hosting this meeting. It's always fabulous to see the interest in these programs.
Thank you. So we will jump right into our presentations, and we're going to start with Jeff Bagg, who is with BSC Group. Hopefully you can see him there on your screen. Jeff has been at BSC Group since March, where he's leading a range of projects, including site assessments for municipally owned properties, preparation of an RFP for disposition of municipal property, establishing a model for a regional downtown management district, and is actively assisting a Cape Cod community to prepare a local comprehensive plan. Prior to joining BSC Group, Jeff was a planning director in East Hampton for 6 years, where he oversaw the planning and preparation for the disposition and reuse of the city's 3 historic elementary schools into affordable housing. And that will be the topic that Jeff shares with us today. Looks like he was able to share his screen. And Jeff, I will hand it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And thanks everyone for having me. I really appreciate being able to talk about this project. I'm a senior planner at BSC Group, but they've been really great about letting me talk about some of these projects that, in East Hampton in particular, just because of some of the nature of them are good models, and they're really important for other people to know about and learn about. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm gonna jump right in. This is just it's a great image. I grabbed it from the internet, so it's not mine, but I wish it was. I hope to be done in 20 minutes or less, but I was having a hard time trying to pick the audience and narrow down the information. But what I wanted to try to just go over was from a municipal perspective, kind of how complicated these projects can be, unfortunately. And I hadn't really laid out this timeline in a while, but even I was highly involved, but even looking back at this timeline, it's eye-opening for people to be aware of how long it can take to do something like this successfully. So all the way, I am going to kind of just touch on all these real quick, but in 2008, the city had a master plan done, and the little caption on the right there. Back then, 20 years ago, the town and city knew that the schools were going to be an issue. There's 3 buildings that house the elementary schools. So back then, the city planner, Stuart Beckley, was very cognizant of this and really helped set forth some steps to start to look at the schools. Between 2010 and 2013, what had happened was that the high school became the priority project for the city, even though the elementary schools were also noted as being, in need of replacement or renovation. The city chose the high school, pursued all the funding, and completed that project in 2013. And so the city has a brand new high school, which was much needed. And then, sort of on the heels of that, in 2016, the school department mainly, went through the MSBA program. They hired, a consulting team to evaluate the elementary schools in great detail, and produce this manual, this document. It's like a 1,200-page document summarizing the condition of the schools. And the recommendation was that they would be very difficult to renovate and incorporate, the renovations as elementary school for the city this size. So it was recommended that a new school be built. And then in 2018, that 2-year process or whatever was occurring then resulted in the designation by MSBA that the school could be funded and put through their program. And so that happened in January of 2018. I started my role as the city planner then in March of 2018. And by May, the community was preparing and ultimately voted on a debt exclusion override to raise the funds, the matching funds. It's like $109 million elementary school that was built. And it was during that time that we really started to conceptualize the fact that these 3 buildings were going to become vacant in the next couple of years, and we needed to start sort of immediately to prepare for that. So using the state had planning grants, the first one we got was big. It was 50,000, and the city matched some money in there to create a downtown strategic plan. We followed that up with another planning grant to kind of create an RFP and go through a public process with the community and the city council. And then also 2021 was pretty busy year. We got another planning grant for the housing production plan. And then 2022, we got $100,000 from Mass Development through their site readiness program. And I'll talk about it in a couple minutes, but we got some conceptual design plans for the sites and the neighborhood, which also needed some infrastructure upgrades. And then we released the RFP in 2023, and then that same year, through a pretty long process, the city council selected Arch Communities, who was going to develop all 3 schools as one project, which is really excellent. This year, 2024, was negotiating a land development agreement, which I will say, as I left, by my own choice, it was I left on good terms, but that land development agreement was much longer of a process than anyone might have anticipated. So that's still ongoing. I think it's close to the finish line. Then with the asterisks here, these are the yet to be completed steps. Project permitting and financing is a huge item. 2026 is the target year for obtaining historic tax credits. Construction, 2028, and then maybe by 2029 there'll actually be people opening doors to their units. So that's just a huge timeline for such a project. This image, it's a little blurry. I do apologize for that, but it was the best one I could find that kind of shows where these buildings are. They're just centrally located right in East Hampton's downtown, kind of on each end. The upper left is Pepin and Center School. And then the lower right is Maple Street School, and they kind of butt both ends of the actual downtown area. This is a map from our downtown strategic plan. Then I figured I would just go through a little bit of basic information about the schools. I know this is a historical commission group, so I want to kind of showcase the buildings. This is Center School. And, as part of our downtown strategic plan, we really were pretty purposeful to realize that we couldn't just start talking about the schools by themselves without talking about the rest of the downtown. And so the plan is actually really robust, but as part of it, they captured this kind of summary information about each school. It was largely based on that 2016 study through the MSBA. But Center School was built in 1902. And, you know, from the early looks at the building for housing, this was the best suited for it. It was kind of a perfect square. You know, and it was arranged in such a way that the units would all have windows, and it was really one of the buildings that everyone saw could be the most easily converted to housing. And obviously, there has been a lot of discussion about trying to preserve it. Um, you know, there's some parking, there's a playground, you know, in this vicinity, and it was really important to kind of just really maintain this building and maintain it as an active use. This is Pepin School. So it's a much larger building. If you look really carefully, those are my two kids standing on the stoop there from a couple years ago. So both of my kids went to these schools, and you know, the last day that they saw kids was June of 2022. But they're there, and this building is much larger, and you can see it in the image on the left, the context. It has, you know, it was built in 1912, and then there were some additions over time. There was a gymnasium built. It wasn't built in 1989, but it was built at some point after that. This is where I'm a history buff, but I'm not a historian. So, you know, you can catch me on some of these details. But I think what I was trying to highlight here is that on the same context map there, Center School is immediately to the right of that. And these two school buildings are on different properties, but they acted as a campus. So students would be in classrooms in the center building, and then they would walk over to the Pepin building for lunch, for the cafeteria or the gymnasium use. And so, you know, we saw these two buildings operating hopefully as some kind of one project, even though they're two separate buildings, and that was really important. I think what I wanted to show here was that the gymnasium became, and you can see the image of it, it's in good condition. Again, these buildings were used until June of 2022. The gymnasium was a really important discussion piece for the community. The cafeteria, the upper auditorium, like above the gymnasium was the auditorium and the cafetorium, and that was important. But the gymnasium was something that was really talked about in terms of an asset that the East Hampton residents did not want to get rid of. So I'll pick it up again, that thread, a little bit later, but that was a really important piece of this Pepin building. And then finally, the third building is Maple Street School. It's on a separate location. In terms of the school use, it functioned as a separate elementary school. It had a separate principal. Students would go there, and they wouldn't really interact with the students who were at Center Pepin. And it was really kind of a good example of a neighborhood school. There's a lot of people who really loved this quality about it, but the condition of the building for school purposes and the ability to expand it just wasn't there. This is a layout. It shows kind of the context. So, you know, there is a small playground in the area, but the rest of the property is basically pavement. And so where this school did not have a gymnasium, the kids were always outside, just on pavement. This is the older building. So this is 1896. And there was an addition in 1924 so this was originally a really small building, and then one of the wings was added on in 1924. The upper two floors, you can see in that graphic on the top right, really start to lay out pretty well for reuse as housing units. The main corridor would allow, you know, apartments on either side, and so that was something that was really important for us to identify early. The basement of the building is problematic. It's like a half story down. It's got all the mechanicals, and there were some additions and modifications to the building in the basement that are going to be challenging, I think, for reuse. It's actually going to shrink the number of units that would potentially be there. But overall, the building's in good shape and was really highly desirable for affordable units, or any units for that matter. One of the things I touch upon was that East Hampton was really going through this full court press to address these buildings. And so we were looking at every opportunity to hone in on what the highest and best use would be, while the goal of kind of preserving the buildings in their neighborhood was really important. We worked with Valley CDC in Western Mass, you know, through CPA money, and they did sort of some basic fit tests for us. And so they went in and they kind of looked at the existing drawings and the measurements, and they helped us make sure that, we could get housing units in these buildings and some parking on site. And that was really informative for us in deciding to package the 3 buildings together as one project. So for affordable housing terms, it's like a scattered site project. But for affordable housing tax credits, there's a sweet spot of 30 to 40 units for a project to really be fundable. And so we started to be concerned that if we just picked center school for that to be affordable housing, it just wouldn't get enough units to be eligible for affordable housing tax credits. So we had this kind of conscious public discussion about grouping them together as one project. It took 2 years to figure that out, but we were all invested in trying to map that out. Kind of taking a step back again from a planning perspective, the downtown strategic plan is a really great document for the city to have. It covers the entirety of the downtown, and it covers topics like parking and underutilized properties and public safety and pedestrian safety improvements. It really does the gamut. I kind of listed out the topics. We had community engagement was a really important aspect of the project, and we asked hard questions of people. We asked the question of what would you want to see happen in these school buildings, just to make sure that we covered that process. Even though at the end of the day, certain things would drive that. So building code requirements, funding. A lot of people had great ideas. We had all the options put on the table, but a lot of people wanted sort of, more of a mixed use or like a hip and happening kind of, like we could just make this a maker space, or we could make this like a bar. There's some really famous building in Oregon called the McMenamin's School Building, and it was a theater and a bar, and it had like these active spaces, and there was some tendency to lean in that direction. But the pandemic really kind of stopped those elements in their tracks. There was never really a lot of funding available for a private developer to come in and do mixed use. But the pandemic really shined a light on the importance of affordable housing and housing in general. So we did find sort of a silver lining as a result of the pandemic, which pushed us for like this clarity of purpose for these buildings. This is just a screenshot, an image of the housing production plan. So the planning department and the city completed this in 2021 as well. The strategy, it was just to make sure that the recommendations in the housing production plan were in line with the goals coming out of the strategic plan for the school buildings. And so we were able to get a lot of public support for the idea of converting the buildings to housing. There was a lot of efforts. The city also has a housing coalition, a group of people who talk and they chime in online and on social media posts and talk about the importance of housing, and they go to meetings. And so we were building this public support for a goal that we hadn't yet really determined whether it was feasible, but we could feel the leaning in that direction. It is really important. It's important for this group, but it's important in general. Also in 2021, we got a grant from Mass Historical Commission to do an inventory. It had long been on this list to update the inventory of the Main Street area. And we wrapped in one of the Center Pepin School complex was clearly in the Main Street area, study area, but we wrapped in Maple Street School, which is kind of on the outskirts, and we had them look at that and incorporate it. And I think what we were careful to do was to identify the importance, the historical significance of these buildings, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't become too strict and absolutely prohibit any discussions of possible demolition. We just didn't know at that point. So we brought this report to a point where we felt like we have identified that they are historically significant. They really appear to be potentially eligible for listing on the, as on the national register, and that was going to be important. to start to see that a project, especially a housing project, would be eligible for historic tax credits. And so we wanted to position these buildings so that the community knew they were important, but also that a developer would know that they are poised to be eligible for the tax credit program, which is super critical for them to actually get preserved. So we had a kind of a keen eye towards that as well. Then I'm going to talk about this slide for a minute, but because I was trying to be concise, and I think leading up to this stage of actually having the RFP and releasing it, we had a planning grant that enabled us to hire a consultant to help with the RFP. But at the same time, we had received funding from Mass Development, and they were helping us do some really important due diligence. And so what we started to explore was things and basically information that would be helpful for a developer to come in with a clearer view of what's happening with the buildings. And so what we boiled this down was $100,000 for Mass Development to do this due diligence. And what we ended up getting was land survey of each of the 3 properties, which was really important because they dated back so long to school uses that there was no survey. There was no actual existing conditions plans or information available about the site. And we used the survey to go through the process to clear the title. And so we established that the schools and then the city, by transferring the property, had clear title to each of the 3 properties. And we have the survey boundaries, and we have all the, we have it all mapped out, done by a land surveyor. So that was really important information. We were able to fund the completion of an appraisal for each of the buildings, so we understood what the actual market value would be. And then what we took, one additional step, is we were able to come up with some conceptual plans for the neighborhoods. So each of these buildings has streets and sidewalks around it that haven't been touched in 60 years, and some of the underground infrastructure is 100 years old. So we took the time to come up with these concept drawings. They're like 10% design drawings, and they came with a cost estimate for something like Mass Works or Housing Works in the future to help a developer, take away some of the costs and some of these infrastructure costs and rebuilding some of the sidewalks in the neighborhood. So all those things were happening while we were getting ready to release this RFP. So we tried to create the clearest picture possible. And then through all these community discussions, we had these evaluation criteria. There was a lot more, but we tried to hone in on providing clarity for what the town was really hoping for, which was affordable housing. The second most important thing was retaining the gymnasium. And so we didn't want to prevent someone from not saving the gym, but we prioritized, we gave higher points, and the weighted points were geared towards someone who could preserve that. Retaining the buildings, we did not exclude the opportunity for demolition, but we encouraged preservation through these criteria. And just one quick plug for communities who are looking at this: Mass Development actually has a really good guide for municipalities to surplus properties, and it's really helpful to lay out kind of this kind of process to get through it.
Jeff, could I interrupt for one quick second?
Yes.
I'm seeing a tall black rectangle over a portion of your slide on the right-hand side. Is that intentional?
No, it's not. Let's see. Is it like that for all of my slides?
I thought you might have been blocking out surprises for later, but yeah,
Oh,
now
I
I'm
see that.
seeing them. Yeah,
Okay, my apologies. Was that on the other slides as well?
they were, yeah.
Okay. I do not know why that's happening.
See.
I'll try one more time, but then I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time.
Sure. Or if you'd prefer, I could share my screen and you could direct the slide advancements.
Sure. I guess if you wanted to do that, we can try that. I apologize.
That's okay. I want to make sure I'm on the right one. Do you know what number I should be at?
No.
13?
Yes, maybe. I didn't number them.
Okay. Just one second, everyone.
And I'm almost done. I'm aware that I'm probably going long, but I'm almost done too.
Okay. That work for everyone?
Yeah, I can see it. Great. My apologies. So yeah, so here, these are just snippets. Everything I've talked about, we've posted, and the East Hampton Planning Department has posted. I took a cue from I think it was the town of Shrewsbury had a reuse project at the Beale School, and I really took a lot of cues from their efforts to catalog and put information online and keep it as transparent as possible, but it's also a resource for people. There's a lot of nuggets in there that people can grab. Um, the RFP again was prioritized for what the community really wanted to see, and we were providing as much information as we could to make it more appealing, to be honest, for a developer to even look at this. These are really obviously big, complicated buildings, and so we were really concerned with not getting any bidders. You can go to the next slide. So just kind of jumping ahead, this is a Gazette article. This is from March of 2023. So after this kind of long process, the city council picked a developer to Arch Communities, and their proposal met a lot of the requirements that we were looking for. And the table on the top shows that the overall projection was 61 units across all 3 buildings, all of which would be affordable to different degrees. And that was really important because we achieved, that threshold for the affordable housing tax credits, and then we hopefully set the stage for them to access historic tax credits. The source of funds graph, I thought, was really just informative to understand the complexities of putting together the financing for a project like this. So they're accessing federal and state housing tax credits, and then federal and state historic tax credits. And so, the historic tax credits by themselves is almost $7 million. And so that becomes one of these really essential components that a developer will need to have access to funds like that to build out, the desires of the community. And this was one of the things that we started to see earlier on was, coming up with mixed uses or something way more fun and creative. They would likely not be eligible for a lot of these resources. Definitely not the housing tax credits, which is all like $14 million. So there is quite a bit of reality check that communities are going to need to go through between what residents who are well-meaning, they want to have so many different things in these buildings, and then the reality of actually trying to get something built and accomplished, that's a really big reckoning that has to happen. On this slide, I was just going to talk about, in all honesty, there have been some challenges, and I think one of the biggest challenges, that the community is facing right now is maintenance of the buildings. For this period of time, when students last walked out the door in June of 2022, the projected timeline for a developer to actually take ownership and control is probably 5 years. So the community is responsible and needs to have some level of maintenance for these buildings. And so, the DPW is the group who has taken that on, and the city is allocating approximately $100,000 a year to keep fuel in the buildings, keep the energy going, keep it at a baseline, condition. There is a purchase price, so the community was offered just over $1 million, but that doesn't come to the community until the developer takes ownership. So there's this period of time with all these projects that I think communities really need to be aware of that. It's super challenging. The other one was the gymnasium. You can go to the next slide, please. I'll touch on the gymnasium in a moment. And so what I wanted to show was we got 3 proposals. 2 were for reuse and 1 was just for one school, and it was for demolition and reconstruction. And so on the image on the right is Maple Street School. I tried to align it so it was close to the rendering. The rendering on the left was a proposal, which we were happy to see the proposal, but it was important for the community to understand what the alternative would have been which was demolition of the building and reconstruction and trying to keep it in character with the neighborhood, but definitely a significant change. And that was not awarded on mainly on two accounts. One was that they only picked one building, and so that was in the criteria. And the other was that it lost points, for demolition of Maple Street School. But I did want to put that in there. We received a lot of pressure. Conversations over the years were about parking. This is really close to Cottage Street, the cultural district area. It's a really popular place, and it is in need of some parking management, but not a whole sea. A sea of parking is not needed. And so we were really kind of preparing and pushing back for that. We did some downtown parking demand studies, and there's another discussion going on in the community about a library. And so those were pressures on this building to demolish the building and build a library, or demolish the building and build parking, or God forbid, a parking garage. We luckily avoided that. Next slide. This is the graphic I should have been speaking to. This is some of the public input talking about the pressures, take down Maple Street, we need a new library, we need parking. So we heard a lot of that, and we were trying to be pretty strategic about responding to those requests. And so, we had the community engagement. We did a parking inventory as part of the downtown plan. We did some parking fit tests, and we tried to show how the school could be redeveloped, and maybe they could get 15 public parking spaces on the property, and 15 is way better than none. So we kind of did some of those, and the city has a separate library facilities assessment ongoing. Just a graphic on some of the types of uses. So art, live, workspace, boutique hotel, educational use, senior center, museum, performance space. We definitely heard a lot of requests, and then we're pretty happy with the outcome at this point. So I think I'm on the last slide, please. Second to last slide. Conceptual design plans. Again, the One Stop for Growth is the state's funding program, and they lay out these projects on a continuum, and this is close to the end of infrastructure improvements. And so we are trying to position the city to be ready to go for mass works or housing works or some other grant funding source to actually rebuild the sidewalks, redo the sewer and the water in the neighborhood. And so we went from planning conceptual phase, and then we did the site due diligence phase, and then as a developer takes ownership of the properties, the city will be working with them to go for these infrastructure grants, and that would be sort of the final phase. And that's in line with how the state, I think, is expecting to see these projects unfold. Now, the last slide is just kind of where is East Hampton currently. Unfortunately, this is kind of recent news. So this is an article from this July. Through the discussions, the cost of preserving the gym was unattainable. And so there was a back and forth at city council and a discussion, and they voted to allow the developer to move forward without the gymnasium as a community asset. And so I think that the anticipation right now is that it would be converted to additional housing units. But the rest of the article goes on to say that it was quite disappointing. I think it was unfortunate, situation that the long-term funds for the city were apparently not achievable right now. And I think aside from that, I think that the permitting and financing process is going to be underway soon. And I think by 2029 is the expectation that the city will actually see some affordable housing units get built while preserving the buildings. And the city has many other projects in the queue. And I think I saw John Mason as the city's parks director. So there are a lot of other historic preservation projects going on, different types. So there's one in the parks. The city has a building that they own called Old Town Hall. And so that's got a 501c3 organization raising funds to convert that building to performance space. And then we have some private developers who are converting mill buildings, on the private side. So the city has quite a bit of preservation going on. So I think that with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Let's take a few minutes now for any immediate questions for Jeff, and we will have time for more questions at the end, but I just wanted to see if anyone had anything they wanted to raise immediately. Okay. If not, we can move on to our second presentation. We're joined today by David Moracey. David is a native of North Adams who studied at Union College in Schenectady, New York, graduating with a bachelor's degree in 1997. David returned to the Berkshires, where he embarked on an entrepreneurial lifestyle. In 2000, David established the firm of Moracey and Associates, a diverse real estate management, investment, and development company in North Adams. David has made a strong commitment to bringing jobs and businesses to North Adams and has had great success in achieving that with the redevelopment of NORAD Mill. Additionally, past redevelopment projects include the Mole Care Block, the former Wall Streeter Shoe Factory, and the former Johnson Elementary School, which we will hear about today. David has developed numerous small businesses over the last 10 plus years, including the NORAD Toy and Candy Company, NORAD Cafe, and he's also a partner in Moracey Real Estate Partners and co-owner of Grazie Italian Restaurant. Upcoming redevelopment projects include the former Notre Dame School in North Adams and the former Notre Dame Church. David serves on the Board of Trustees of Berkshire Health Systems, is chair of the Williamstown Fire District Prudential Committee, treasurer of the Board of Northern Berkshire EMS, chair of the Mass Hire Berkshire Workforce Board, and serves on the board of Mountain One. David is currently residing in Williamstown with his wife and 2 children.
Thank you very much. That's the long-winded bio. I apologize for that, but
That's okay.
I do sleep in.
No.
So as far as the slideshow, if you want to bring it up, and I'll just tell you when to advance to the next screen.
Sure, that sounds great.
Well, again, thank you for having me this morning. We're going to speak today about the former Johnson Elementary School in North Adams. This project was completed back in fall of 2023. This was a former neighborhood school in North Adams. And it's interesting too, you'll see the photos and you'll see how it resembles one of the school buildings that we were just presented with. And there's so many of these just great school buildings, and the architecture is just amazing. And we had a lot of fun with this project. So originally constructed in 1896, neighborhood school in what was known as the Amity Square section of North Adams. Hence the reason when we rebranded it as the Residences at Amity Square. You can advance to the next slide.
There we go.
We acquired this from the city. The city put an RFP out for this school once after it was no longer an elementary school. It had a child care program in it for many years. The city found it just way too much of a building to maintain. Only about half of it was being used. So they put an RFP out. I believe it was back in 2020. We acquired this school for $225,000, and obviously with the promise to the community that we would redevelop it into housing. This school was redeveloped into market rate housing, and I'm going to really kind of talk about some of the challenges we faced and some of the logistics that go along with converting these former school buildings into housing. Construction for us started in the fall of 2021. As you can see here, we did 8 2-bedroom, 1-bath units, 4 2-bedroom, 2-bath units, a studio unit, and then we did a penthouse unit, which was the entire 3rd floor of the main school building. Its former use was the auditorium of the school. So the auditorium was actually up on the 3rd floor, had a stage up there, and we decided we'd get a little bold and go for just one big unit up there. And we actually had great success with that. And believe it or not, at the end of the day, it was the first unit to rent when we finished this project. You can advance on to the next slide, please. So this is an interesting photo here. We have a lot of wall hangings throughout the school. We actually found the original hand-drawn blueprints from 1896, and we had them all framed. The frames actually were custom done by our woodworkers here in our company, where we repurposed the original wood timbers that we removed from the building, and we framed the blueprints. So all throughout the school, we actually had the original architectural plans displayed throughout the school. We just thought that was kind of a neat little historical item there. If you could proceed on. So a little background on my company. We're kind of an in-house development company. We're totally private. And when I say private, I guess it's basically me. We typically do not go for any state funding or grant funding. We have everything when it comes to trades in-house. We have a full service construction team, carpenters, we have an electrical company, HVAC. So everything's basically in-house for our firm, which allows us to actually do these projects rather expeditiously, and as well as to stay to a pretty strict budget, while at the same time turning these projects around and creating some really impressive spaces. What this photo here shows, this is on the lower basement level, and it shows where the elevator is. This was a little bit of a challenge in this particular building. Obviously, when we take these old schools, we need to bring them up to ADA standards. We have to really look at life safety standards and bring them up to code. And the challenge with this school was incorporating the elevator, where I wanted to incorporate the elevator within the central core of the building. And this is actually a giant ventilation shaft, which we were able to retrofit and put the elevator in the central core of the building. Would I do that again? Probably not. It was a rather costly endeavor, and it did prove to have some challenges. Frankly, the shaft was a little bit out of square and plumb, but at the end of the day, we were able to maintain, the elevator being located within the central core of the building. If you could advance to the next slide. This just gives you a sense of some of the infrastructure work that goes into these buildings. The photo on the left is, I guess you'd call it the old dinosaur. That's just the old coal-fired boiler that was in the building. We thought it kind of neat to just have it remain there in the boiler room. It's got some cool features to it. And then you can see on the right the new high efficiency heating and hot water, domestic hot water system, and the amount of infrastructure that goes into these buildings. We have a typical model when we do our housing projects. We always include heat and hot water in the rent. We find that to be very cost effective for us. We do redundant high efficiency boilers. And believe it or not, we find the cost to be very, very manageable. And we also find it to be a little enticing too when we are looking to lease these. We always do separate electric to all the residences, and the tenant pays for their electric, but the heat and hot water is always included. And we have all throughout our buildings just a very standard system that we do, and it makes for easy maintenance for our maintenance team too. If you could forward along. So just a few features. Again, it's so great speaking to this committee because I am all about building preservation, and I just love, I just have a passion for brick buildings. I love brick buildings, and I love historic buildings of the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was really important to us to attempt to maintain as many of the original architectural elements as possible. All the while, we obviously have to bring in features such as fire protection. So if you look at the photo on the left there, you can see the original tin ceilings of the central common areas of the building, and you also see a sprinkler line flying through it. But we feel that it just kind of melds in there by the way we painted it. Another challenge about these buildings that are constructed in the manner, again, that we saw in the last presentation as well as this one, they're essentially big cores. They're essentially big boxes. And one thing that makes it challenging with redeveloping these, and you'll see in an upcoming photo, is that they have these wide open common spaces where the classrooms tend to be placed on the outer perimeter of it. So it does result in what I guess you would say would be, I wouldn't say wasted space, but it is just an abundant amount of open space. The challenge for us to attempt to move into that space to get more square footage for the apartments is, and if you look at the photo on the left, you can see that cream colored wall, and on the lower right corner of that photo, that is an approximately 36-inch thick brick wall that has some air shafts in it. And it would just be cost prohibitive to attempt to move into these common spaces and cut them up into more housing. The photo on the right, just we're all about finding little elements and stuff and preserving them. These particular desks, we love them because it actually, although you can't see it on the cast iron legs, it says North Adams, Mass. 1880. These desks we actually repurposed from our upcoming project, which we found in the attic. But we just thought we'd do a little thing there. You know, we found some maps in the school, and we did these little displays, and people just got a kick out of them when we did our open house of the project. We do like to try to preserve as many original elements as possible. If you could advance, please. So, original school, the box, the core, was constructed in 1896. In 1920, with the growing population in North Adams, they put an addition on. And this is the addition portion of the building, where, again, we saw a similar thing in the last presentation. It's a long corridor, and we have units off to the left and the right of it. And it was a 2-story addition. And you also will notice lots of little doors on the left and right. There was some ancillary spaces. There was the old principal's office, the old nurse's office. Again, we couldn't really incorporate them into any kind of a design, but we found that they serve us well for some support areas of the building, as well as we have various tenants use them for storage. One thing that was very important to us was to preserve all the original wood floors as well as the original woodwork, and obviously you can see that in this photo as well as some others that we'll see. If you could progress, please. So 2 photos here. On the left shows the stairwell, the main stairwell. We have 3 main stairwells very similar to this, as well as some of the woodwork. And then on the right shows that rather large common corridor that we have on both floors 1 and 2 of the main original core. Again, you can see how we incorporated the elevator into it. But we found that this is a nice little community space for the residents. We really have created a community in this building, and that really makes us proud. A very diverse demographic that resides there. Quite frankly, we have some old school teachers that reside in this building, and they just love it. And they have created such a community, and we have nothing but positive feedback. Another feature I'm really proud of is the actual light fixtures that you see hanging there are the original schoolhouse lights from the building. When I was exploring, after I buy a building, you know, you always have that, oh boy, what did I get myself into? So I tend to go to a building on a Saturday when it's quiet and nobody's around and explore around. And I actually found in an attic area way off in the corner of just this old dirty attic portion of the building, about 30 of these original schoolhouse fixtures with the milk glass. And I was just so happy to see that. We rewired them, repurposed them, and now we have the original schoolhouse fixtures hanging back in the school. And that really was something that our whole team was proud of. But again, that photo on the right does show you these rather wide areas, but I think it works nice, and the residents really seem to like it. And on each floor, you have the apartments that radiate off to the side of it and stuff. If you could please proceed. So here's a couple photos of just inside some of the apartments. We did look to, if you look at the photo on the left, we did look to have some exposed brick in there. We have all the apartments, 8 of them are what they call them, the octuplets. All 8 are exactly the same. And then we have the quadruplets where there's 4 that are all the same. If you look at the photo on the right, it's a little hard to tell, but that's where your entry comes in. And in all these apartments, we wanted to just keep a little bit of that original history with the slate board as you come in, and it's got the wooden chalk tray and then some of the woodwork. And then another challenge with all these buildings is to integrate your modern amenities, such as your HVAC system. We didn't want a real obtrusive HVAC system. So if you look on the left, you can see how we had to soffit in above the windows to conceal the ductwork. And then on the photo on the right, if you look to the right, we repurposed the historic air grates that were there. They have a lot of detail to them, and we were able to use that as part of our HVAC system. So a lot of unique design work goes into this to really try to keep as much as this old school, we'll call it old school, this old school feel. So if we could progress. Again, this is a photo taken in one of the quadruplet units. You can see the kitchen, and before that is the living area. The windows, plenty of light. These schools were all based on natural light. The photo on the right is actually showing a walk-in closet area with a bedroom adjacent to it, and then it has a bathroom adjacent to it. And again, the floors, I mean, the floors came out great in this, and that's really something that people are just in awe over when they see them. And if you could progress. So again, the bathroom layouts that we do, this would be in the 8 units. We have a very standardized system where everything's stacked right upon the other bathroom. That really streamlines our plumbing process, our utilities, our electrical, our drains, everything for our washer and dryers when it comes to the vents. And it just really streamlines the process. And these are the things you have to take into consideration when you're going into these buildings, is how can you make it cost effective from a mechanical standpoint? All the vanities, we do the same size. All our showers, we do our standard showers, 48 inches by 36 inches. But we also want to give it some nice finishes with the subway tile and the glass shower doors and the mosaic floor tiles. If you could proceed. So this is the penthouse, and quite frankly, these photos don't do it justice, but this is approximately 3,200 square feet, the former auditorium. It is 2+ bedrooms with each bedroom is basically a bedroom suite with large his and her vanities in each bathroom. Very impressive kitchen. You can see the original skylights, which obviously we did new glazing and what have you. But this was the auditorium portion of the school, and this was a little bit of a stick our neck out when we did this project on this 3rd floor. We didn't know how well it would be received, how it would go over to do such a sizable, quite frankly, higher end unit. But the views from this are amazing. You can kind of see it does overlook Mass MoCA, which is our contemporary art museum here in North Adams. It is a hop, skip, and a jump to Mass MoCA, as well as this building is walking distance to the downtown. Much to my surprise, and I think that of my staff and the community at large, is when we finally opened this project up for leasing, this had 2 people vying for it, and this was the first lease we signed, was this 3rd floor penthouse. The other nice thing about this 3rd floor penthouse is the elevator opens up right into the living room. It's private access to this level via key fob system. So it is kind of nice to have an elevator open right to your living room. But it really came out nice, and again, amazing views from this level. If you could progress. This we thought was just kind of a neat little photo. This is just a one-off space in the basement level. Again, as we heard in the prior presentation, same thing. You have this basement level, which can be very challenging because half of it is below grade and half of it is above grade. We looked originally at perhaps putting some apartments down there. We just found that it would be cost prohibitive and too challenging. So we had this one area here, and as the residents started to move in, they said, hey, we see this vacant space. Can we create a community and art space in it? We're like, have at it. And the residents have all band together, and they've created this little art space. They do all kinds of arts and crafts in there. It's just a little community space. And that, frankly, made us feel good, too. Other areas of the basement, secure tenant storage. We did storage units for all the tenants have bikes, they have canoes and all that. So although we had some bulk vacant space in the basement level, it did fill up fast. Formerly, these were classrooms, but again, just cost prohibitive to really look to make these into apartments. If you could proceed. This just gives you a little sense of technology that goes into these buildings. This building there's another section of this basement area where there's a computer server. The building has a lot of technology. It has 24/7. It has security systems. It has camera systems. It has all keyless access, intercom systems. So a lot of technology. And of course, with all this technology comes the price tag. But just goes to show that we really bring these buildings right up to the latest and greatest of technology and standards. And it's just been functioning very, very well. I'm not sure, do we have anything else? Okay, so that's basically it for photos. Again, this project took us essentially 2 years to do for construction, a little longer than we would have liked to. And the only reason for that is just due to the sheer workload that our construction part of our company had. We had to pull off to do a few other projects. But it, all in all, was just a great project, great for the community, great for North Adams, preserved this building. And our plan for early 2025 is to get into our next school building, which is very, very similar. It was built in 1890 in North Adams. It's the former Notre Dame school in North Adams. Very similar design, very similar style. Now we feel that we've got a pretty good handle on this type of construction. So now we'll know what to do right this time and what we won't do it again and what to do over again. So. But I'm happy to answer any questions, especially when it comes to the challenges of these buildings. Obviously, my background's construction, so I'm bringing a very constructive aspect to this discussion.
If anyone has questions for either of the presenters, please feel free to either unmute or raise your hand through Zoom, however you choose.
David, I have a question. That was fascinating because I think it is like the next stage of what's happening in East Hampton with the actual construction. So very impressive. It's just a basic question, but the community space in the basement, that was something that we've heard about, at least in one of the schools, as could be challenging. Do the tenants have to lease that space, or
No.
have you built it into somehow that it's just available without part of the lease or something like that?
Yeah, it's just available. We really didn't have any use for it. We saw it as just some ancillary storage area. And then one of my coworkers just started getting a call saying, "Hey, what are you doing with that space down there?" And we look at it this. We love our tenants and we want them to just have the greatest experience in our buildings. And when they came to us with this plan, hey, we want to make it this little art space. And I think a couple of the older tenants and stuff, they do like a weekly workout or aerobics in there and stuff. We said, have at it. And I sent my electricians there. We put a couple outlets in. We just look at it as just a little amenity of the overall building for the tenants to have free use of.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
And I'm happy, again, if anybody ever is doing one of these projects or involved in one of these projects and would like, it's obviously there's so much more to point out, but to be able to, we're happy to give a tour and really show how to overcome some of the challenges. Because again, I just thought it was so ironic when I saw the photo of Jeff's school, and it's like, oh, hey, that kind of looks like our school. There's so many of these schools all over that are very, very similar in style, and so they have a lot of the same elements and construction characteristics to them. Great.
We have a comment in the chat that just want to draw people's attention to. Carol says that she is from Tyringham and trying to save the 2-room wooden schoolhouse and is interested in the issue of maintaining it while waiting for restoration. David, how long had the Johnson School been out of use before you began the renovation?
So Johnson School was out of use for about a year before we started. The nice thing about Johnson is it was heated. By the time we got to it, it really was non-functional, but it had been maintained well over the years. Now the next school that we're going to do, the Notre Dame school, that's been empty since the 80s, so it's a little more challenging. Believe it or not, this is not the first school that we renovated here in North Adams. We did one. It was an old 1840s two-room schoolhouse in North Adams. Unlike the one in Tyringham, it was a brick one. It was known as the Old Chestnut School, and it had eventually been turned into a church. And we did that project back in early 2000s. That one was in rough shape. Most people, I think, quite frankly, thought I was probably crazy to take it. I mean, you had good sections of the roof that caved in and whatnot, but it was just such an old historic school. Again, going back to the 1840s. I mean, this thing was old. Wooden schools are a little more challenging, obviously. Now, not knowing the full story behind this, I don't know if that school in Tyringham is something that the town is currently in possession of, or if it's in private hands. But preservation is everything, and you want to attempt to mitigate the effects of water damage, maintain somewhat of a watertight cover structure on the building, and hopefully either do it from a community standpoint or from a private development standpoint.
I had a question, if I could jump in, and it could be for either or both presenters. What suggestions do you have for communities that what they can do to, I guess, make these properties attractive, get the word out? A community really wants to see a school redeveloped. What advice do you have for the community leaders, the historical commission, all the players to make the project actually happen?
I would defer to Jeff on that, just because I feel you have a little more experience when it comes to the municipal side of matters.
Yeah, I mean, I would be curious your perspective, David, too. I mean, I think clarity was something that we kept hearing about. And I mean, we had 3 schools. So we had, I remember being part of this conversation and saying we're actually lucky that we had 3 and not just one, because then all these competing resources would be focused on this one school. But we were happy with the clarity that we were able to achieve in terms of what did the community want to see there. And we hope that it pans out through the permitting, that the developer who goes through that permitting process will not get, completely chastised by the community for proposing something. It was really clear. And then we were just focused on trying to give as much information as possible. So, the mayor started at the mayor down city council, everyone was on board with trying to set the stage as much as possible. So we had created the grant narratives for doing that over time. And I think that's probably the one most important thing is to understand and educate people that they take time. It's not like we heard a lot of misconceptions that everybody would want that. And actually it's very scary, I think, for a team or a developer to take on one of these buildings. They are full of surprises and they're very costly. So one perspective might be, oh, this is great, everyone's gonna like it, everybody would want to just take this building, when in reality you're actually very lucky to get a developer to take it, and the developers are looking at other properties and then they're weighing the ones that they might want to take the risk on. And so you really have to go the full court press, and you really have to roll out a red carpet as much as you can. I think enticing people more than just begging is really important.
One thing I can say is, and I think in just about every community in Massachusetts, if there's something that the residents in the community are going to be very passionate about, it is former school buildings and former churches. Especially because everybody brings up, all the nostalgia. And when they see their elementary school or their childhood school close, they're very passionate about it. They don't want to see it go to the wrecking ball. We had amazing community support, and I think people really in the community rally behind the redevelopment. I think they're more they get very passionate about ensuring that building is going to be preserved. It's all about the preservation, and especially if you can still maintain that exterior look of the building. So when they bring their kids and their grandkids by, they can tell all the stories of days gone by from when they were students there. And we did an open house it was very important to me when we finished the Johnson School project to do a community open house. And boy, did we have a turnout. And there was actually, believe it or not, that particular weekend, there was a class reunion in town. And it was a high school class reunion, but so many of them had gone to this school as elementary students. And I mean, people were just blown away. We had people in tears. It was amazing. So many former teachers coming through, pointing out their classrooms and stuff. So it's the community tends to have a lot of feedback in these projects, but they really just want to see these buildings preserved, which is a great thing.
All right, any other questions from any of our attendees? I want to thank both of our presenters. This was really excellent to have your perspectives from the municipal side and the community planning and involvement all the way through to completion by developer. This was and the fact that the projects that we discussed included market rate and affordable housing configurations and multi-site configurations. We had a lot to learn, and we really appreciate your time and your expertise and the things that you're doing to help our communities preserve these buildings so beautifully. So thank you both, Jeff and David. All right, if there are any other last questions, I will give one more opportunity, but other than that, we thank you all for coming and appreciate your attention to historic preservation in Western Mass. We're all glad to be working on this, and we look forward to presenting another session in a few months.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.